Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's been a very long while, but God has been speaking to me throughout, and there's been many things that God has laid on my heart for me to speak on and to dive into, to relay to just whoever wants to hear, whoever wants to take these things in. So the title is called Mind Over Matter. What does that usually mean? Uh, in everyday life when we hear it out in the streets, when we hear it from someone else, when we're doing things and we hear that, what does it actually mean? So usually what it means in that context is that we have to conquer what we're doing by somewhat mastering our thoughts. Okay, so I think I'm over explaining that, but essentially what it is you use your mind to combat what is in front of you, and what it looks like matters more, right? Or this mountain that you find in front of you, that you see in front of you, if you want to sort of climb this mountain and you're struggling to climb this mountain, but you can do it, your body's capable of doing it. The problem is just that your mind is telling you you can't do it, your mind is telling you no. And so by overcoming the negative thoughts, or overcoming um, what your mind is telling you, you will then be able to move yourself forward and complete that mission, or complete or overcome that hurdle, or climb that mountain, whatever it may be. So we focus mostly on negativity around us. And why I say that is because there is a lot of negativity. There's so much negativity around us. It's hard to move anywhere without that being sprung into our faces, or being brought up in random conversation, or just brought up, um sorry, just the load shedding, or just brought up. By the way, we get load shedding in South Africa. But let me continue. Or just brought up generally, right? And this takes up most of our thoughts. Therefore, the work of the enemy and the devil becomes more and more evident. So, what I'm saying there, what I mean by that is just that, so you have this negativity all around you. You have these things constantly being thrown at you from the world, from people around you, from family, from this, from that, the other thing, such that this is the only thing that you kind of bombarded with. And what happens is that this takes up most of your mind space, to the point where this is most of what you think about, which makes sense, because somewhat makes sense because of what you're being fed, or what is sort of what you're being faced with, right, or met with. But in the process, God may become less. So when these things sort of come at you and it builds up in your mind, God then to a certain extent becomes less, and this negativity becomes more. We sometimes then forget that the devil cannot compare to God. This is not a fair fight. When I was writing these things, and when I, was hearing these things, because it was very relevant to me at the time as well, when I received this into my spirit, I was like, you know what, this is so true. Like, you become overcome with this negativity, but what we forget to realize when this negativity comes in is the fact that God becomes less, because we become to a certain extent crippled by these things that we hear and the circumstances we are surrounded by. And in that, the devil somewhat begins to win over our minds and win over, you know, the space in our mind compared to God, and who God is compared to the devil, and what the devil brings into our lives and brings into the spaces we find ourselves in, into the world. And what makes it different to God and his kingdom and everything that he wants for us, when you think of, no, but if God is, this big, is greater than the devil, if God wins, if God is all powerful, why does it look like the devil's winning? Because this is all that we see. We see all this negativity. We see all this, war. We see all of these things that are happening that are wrong. We see all this wickedness. How can this mean that, you know, God is bigger if all that we can see and what is evident is negativity? But the difference, so what makes it different and why we see these things happening is because of the gentleness and love God exhibits by giving each human being free will to choose him or to choose sin. And what this means is that everyone has the ability to choose to do something wrong or to choose to do something right. And to choose God is obviously for your betterment. So when you're choosing God, you're choosing life. If you're choosing the opposite of God, meaning your own will, your own things, you are choosing sin, essentially. And when you choose sin, and oftentimes that is what people do, you can basically do whatever you want, right? To a certain extent. But people cross many boundaries by doing whatever they want. And that's why you see a lot of wickedness. That's why you see a lot of negativity. But the Bible also talks about these things that will happen. And this is what is mentioned in Revelation as well. But this does not mean that God is not going to win and isn't winning. This does not mean that the devil is bigger than God simply because of what we see. Because remember, our eyes are very deceiving, and that we need to be able to see with our spiritual eyes. We need to be able to see and sense these things and discern with the Holy Spirit, compared and not just be led or misled by what we see in the world, or be taken over by whatever's going on in a negative way. Yeah, so with God we will win the war. So everything happening that constantly looks so negative is due to the choice each individual has made to go against God's will for their lives, right? This does not make the devil bigger than God, because remember, the Bible talks about the end times, as I said, distraction and confusion. So he knows what is going on. Also remember that the devil is also trying to win souls for the kingdom of darkness. And he is doing it faster and obviously, mostly because he is desperate as his day of destruction is near. And the destruction is brought about by God. So to our Christian knowledge, we understand that at the end of days, the devil will meet his end, the devil will essentially meet his destruction. Right? And he wants everyone, he wants as many people as possible to go down with him. This is why he's so desperate. And as the day gets closer, as the end of days gets closer, the devil is more and more eager and urgent about sort of gaining souls for the darkness. But we must not be fooled. We can't be fooled by this. And what we see in front of us, what we see around us, God is bigger, God is better. He is all powerful. And this we need to continue saying to ourselves. So often we forget that God is bigger and that this is not a fair fight, as I've said earlier. And when you're watching movies and then you see like, oh, there's this wicked person or this horrible person doing horrible things, this villain, then you also see like a hero in whatever movie you're watching, right? And usually these people or these individuals or these entities, whatever it is in this movie, that whatever it is that this movie is illustrating, you find that they are on the same level. But in this spiritual fight, in this spiritual war that we are in our understanding, we need to know that God is so much bigger than the devil. They do not compare. The only reason why we think they compare is because of what we see in front of us and what the devil has, quote unquote, accomplished on earth. And this is a lie from the devil, in fact. We must not be misled by that, because God is powerful. He's bigger, God is bigger, God is better, and he is all powerful and he is more powerful to infinity degree compared to the devil. So by thinking on this, we need to allow him to consume our thoughts in light of the fact that he will win the war. So even though we see these things in front of us, we need to recognize and understand that God is bigger. And then we need to allow him to consume our thoughts. We need him to consume our thoughts in light of the fact that he will win the war. Understanding this is very imperative in moving forward, especially in the day and age that we find ourselves in. All these things that we see in front of us are just telling of the times that we live and telling us of how closer we are to that end of days, to where Jesus will come. And we should not allow the devil to win the war of our minds. This is why we need to conform our minds to not be of this world, but to be of God's kingdom, right? And be transformed by renewing our mind. And how do we renew our mind? By feeding it with the things of God and feeding it and having ourselves understand and affirm ourselves and pray into the fact that God is bigger and better. Your mind's gravitation towards him is of importance to him. So the verse that I wanted to speak on here is Romans 12 verse 2, and then also Colossians 3 verse 2. So let me just go to Romans 12 verse 2. Okay. So what Romans 12 verse 2 says, it says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and prove what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Let me go to Colossians 3 verse 2. Okay, well, Colossians 3 verse 2 says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, not on earthly things. And so, the emphasis that I'm putting on here is for the fact that we need to recognize and understand that these things do happen in our mind, that these things are busy happening live, and the devil is actively trying to divert our thinking, divert our minds, divert our understanding and knowledge of who God is and what God is trying to accomplish here by moving us into the space of negativity, moving us into the space of misinterpreting what we see in front of us as God not winning, or as the devil being big, or as the devil winning, or as the devil, doing all of these things. That's the one thing. And then the other thing is that we need to, like this verse says, we need to set our minds. It's very important that it says set our minds, because our minds is usually where majority of the spiritual warfare goes on. Right? And so we need to set our minds on the things above and not on earthly things, the things that we see, the things that we are exposed to, the negativity that's all around us, the environments we find ourselves in, the circumstances that we find ourselves in as well. Understand that you are made to be part of God's family, to live in and amongst those who reside in heaven. This is another point that I wanted to make. We are part of God's family. As Christians, we are part of God's family. And we are made to live in and amongst those heavenly beings and those who reside in heaven. And we also don't take heed of this as often as we should. But this reminds me of a quote that my sister really likes, that I've also come to really appreciate as well, by C.S. Lewis. And what it says is that if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. And I thought this is so profound, and I'm sure to her this is also very profound, just in what it says, is because we were not made for this world. And we were made for God's family. We were made for heaven. We were made for God's kingdom. We were made to be in fellowship with God and his righteousness, and understanding him and being in relationship with him. And so when we find ourselves in those spaces where we see all this negativity and we realize that this is wrong, we realize that this is horrible, and and to a certain extent you feel like, oh no, but this is horrible. This is hopeless. What are we doing here? What is the point of this? But also, I don't want to be here. Oftentimes we feel that. Um, and nothing satisfies. And like it says, the rest of the quote says, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. Do we know this? Do we understand what this means? Do we think about it? Do we grapple with it? Do we try and figure out what this means and what it is that, you know, is in, intrinsically embedded in our hearts, that this is not what life should look like. This is not what we were made for. You know, we were not made for this terror, this wickedness, this horribleness, this evilness all around us. We were not made for this. And this is why it hurts us when we see certain things happen and it affects us in those ways. But what we need to do is we need to understand, and we need to come to the realization that God is doing something. He is busy overcoming these things for us, and He is going to win the war at the end of the day, at the end of everything. And this is what we need to understand. And He's actively doing these things. But remember that, and also just remember that the devil is actively trying to divert your concentration from where it needs to be, and that needs to be on God, regardless of what's going on. It's fine if the negativity is bringing you to action and moving you to do things for God and walk in God's life, and walk in God's will for your life, and actively move in His kingdom, and broaden His kingdom on here on earth, and telling people about these things to understand that we do need God. So all of these things also means that is an indication that we need God, and we are nothing without Him. Essentially, we are negative without Him. We don't have our true family, so to speak, without God. And we are lost without Him in that sense. And so, as the devil tries to turn those things against, tries to move your mind into various directions regarding whatever you find in front of yourself, may your automatic response through practice be to point to God in your mind and fight the matter that you find in front of yourself with the mind of Christ, with the mind of God, with the mind of His righteousness, with the mind of His kingdom, with the mind of how big He is, with the mind of what He's trying to accomplish, with the mind of the fact that God is big, and that this is not an equal fight. God, I really pray that you guys will be blessed by this. I know this was a very long video right now, but this was what He laid on my heart to speak about. And whoever hears this, may you be blessed. May you understand that things are not necessarily going to get easier. And so we need to find ourselves in the Word, digging deep into the Word. And not just taking in whatever we hear. We need to filter it through the Word. We need to filter it through our conversations and our relationship with God. And we need to filter it through who He is, and we need to remind ourselves daily of who He is, regardless of whether that means you need to take a verse and put it up for yourself, whether that means you need to change your profile picture, or your wallpaper, or all of those things, to something that encourages you, to a verse from you and your book, or you and your girlfriend, or you and your husband, you and your wife, you know or your family for that matter. Whether it means that you need to change it into a verse or into those things, do those things. Be active in trying to remind yourself of who God is, and what He wants to do, and what you and where your position is in your mind, and fight those fights that you find yourself in. But yeah, I pray that you guys are blessed by what I just spoke about. Like I said, we had load shedding here. And that was possibly the devil working here. Do you know, I could easily just have stopped, right? And that thought maybe crossed my mind, but not today, Satan. And that's one of the things that you need to do as well. May you embrace him and may you find that his love um, exceeds all and that he's bigger than anything that you will ever know. Yeah. So have a great week, guys, and God bless.